All right, we're going to conclude test number 3 in lab with basic human organs. This is a piece of cake, but don't overlook it because you don't want to make silly mistakes on the test where you miss an internal organ because you didn't study. So if you look, what is it, on page 99 is the simple list here. This is our list of visceral anatomy. And I'm just going to take a few minutes. I've got a diagram. We're just going to label these things. And it's a piece of cake, really. So let's look at our picture here. And we've got our major internal organs. I'm just going to go through these. A lot of these are kind of digestive organs. And there's a few miscellaneous things. But if you look, this list is really short, which is nice. You don't really go into detail with this until you get into A and P2. So we're going to be able to breeze through this in just a couple of minutes. So, of course, if you look at this, part of the test, it's not on this list, but just to mention it, don't forget that you've got your heart, of course, right? So you got your heart. I know that that is not on this list, but it's on the other list. So you have your heart and you have your lungs. So be able to name heart and lungs like you have studied in the past with the other lists. All right. So you got your heart and your lungs. To start with the list, it says esophagus. We're basically going to kind of follow the pathway of food through our digestive system for part of this. The esophagus is next. So the esophagus is your food tube, right? And you can easily tell it from the trachea because remember in the last video, I told you that the trachea has these rings around them. Well, your esophagus doesn't. It's a muscular food tube. So it's a smooth tube and it lies under the trachea. So the trachea sits on top of the esophagus. All right, so I'm going to put that in here. I'm just going to write under the trachea. And it is a smooth tube that doesn't have those rings. Piece of cake, right? Okay, now your esophagus is going to lead to your stomach. The stomach is right here. So this is your stomach. And the stomach is a little bit higher than most people think it is. You know, when you're not feeling good and you're like, oh, I have a stomach ache. You actually don't really have a stomach ache. You have an intestine ache. Your stomach is higher up. And our stomach aches are actually intestine aches, but that's okay. So you've got your stomach. Your stomach is centralized but higher up, right below your rib cage is where your stomach's located. All right. Then we have, of course, if you look at the abdomen, I told you that it's separated from your thoracic cavity by this diaphragm. So the diaphragm is this structure right here. So I'm going to label the diaphragm as well. I know it's not on this list, but it was on our respiratory list that I just did. So we should recognize what that diaphragm or where that diaphragm is. So this diaphragm is separating your thoracic cavity where your lungs and your heart and your esophagus are from your abdomen where your liver, stomach, reproductive organs, digestive organs, all those guys are. All right. So you find that diaphragm. Below it, right below the diaphragm, is a big, dark, kind of purplish red organ. That's going to be your liver. So the liver is kind of on the upper, it's the upper right quadrant of your abdomen is the liver. All right, so that's pretty straightforward. You got your liver. It is your largest internal organ. It's not, I guess, technically it's not your largest organ because that would be your skin, but it's the largest internal organ that you have. Very important organ, as we all know. We've been learning through the semester. So you've got your liver. Below the liver, on the right lobe of your liver, you'll notice this little green structure. That green structure is your gallbladder. So the gallbladder stores the bile that's made by your liver. So gallbladder, on the human, it's always green because bile is green and it colors that gallbladder green. So your gallbladder really is green. So you've got your liver on the upper right quadrant of your abdomen. Right below it, that green structure is your gallbladder. Kind of centralized is your stomach. Then if you notice, we've got kind of this bluish organ that is in the upper left quadrant of our abdomen. That is going to be your spleen. So the spleen is in the upper right. The liver is in the upper left. The spleen is also much smaller than your liver, so they're easily differentiated apart. Now remember, your spleen's going to have two primary functions. It's going to store blood, so it's a blood reservoir, but then it's also going to be recycling red blood cells. Okay, so you've got your gallbladder, you got your liver, you got your spleen, you got your stomach. Then as we move down from the stomach, the food stuff is going to leave your stomach and enter your small intestine. The small intestine is all of this here in the middle. It's named the small intestine because of its diameter. It's actually very long. We could call it the long intestine. Maybe that would be a more appropriate name. But it's referred to as the small intestine because of its diameter. It has a smaller diameter, so they call it the small intestine. So all of this is your small intestine. Now in A&P2, you're going to differentiate between the different parts and everything, but for this class, all you got to know is small intestine, and you're good. Okay. Then we have, it looks like a picture frame going around the small intestine. This picture frame going around the small intestine is your large intestine. So our large intestine is named after its diameter because it's got a larger diameter. So we call it the large intestine. But it's a picture frame that's going around your small intestine. Whoops, I can't spell. How am I supposed to count spelling off you guys if I can't even do it? Okay, I'm joking. Large intestine. All right. Now they threw in one part of your large intestine that you need to know, and it's the very beginning of the small intestine called the cecum. So your small intestine comes down. If you notice on this picture, the small intestine is going to enter your large intestine. This beginning of your large intestine is called the cecum. And the cecum contains an organ that you need to know, or a structure you need to know, that's a little dangly-do, little finger that's hanging off of the cecum. See this little finger hanging off of the cecum? That little finger hanging off of your cecum is your appendix. So you have to know the appendix. And you should know where your appendix is. I was just watching Untold Stories of the ER with my daughter last night. We were this woman had an appendicitis, and so I was telling her the appendix is in your lower right quadrant of your abdomen. So if you are experiencing a lot of pain in your lower extremities, you need to get that checked out right away because it could be an appendicitis. Your appendix could be inflamed and it can rupture. If it ruptures, it can cause all kinds of problems like peritonitis, the inflammation of those serous membranes. The bag around your intestines can get inflamed. I just mentioned that in our last video. So your appendix is in the lower right quadrant of your abdomen. So when we kind of differentiate and think about where organs are, your liver is in the upper right, your spleen is in the upper left, your cecum and your appendix is in the lower right. All right, so those are just little landmarks that I think of when I think of the internal organs. Now, there are two structures that are not really shown on this diagram very well. The mesentery and our oh, did they take it off the list? I guess they did. Oh no, it's there. Omentum. There it is. So our omentum and our mesentery are two things that my diagram doesn't really show very well. So I'm just going to explain what it is. And perhaps Dr. West's video, she actually shows you on a model where these two structures are. But if we were to let's first look at the small intestine. So I'm going to get rid of a few of my labels here just to make this easier. Let's just get rid of them all. What the heck? And if I zoom in to our picture, if you notice the small intestine on this diagram, you see all these spaces and where the small intestine are. So I'm gonna make this let's make it a red color just so that you can see. So all of these spaces around the small intestine tubes, it's actually a membrane. So the small intestine is not loose like a rope inside your abdomen. I always think, and I know I'm getting dated with this example because this is an old movie, and some of you may not have seen this, but if you've ever seen Braveheart, at the end of Braveheart, he's executed, and there's that little guy who is demonstrating to the crowd what's going to happen to him. And he takes this rope and he's pulling it out like they're going to rip out his intestines. You can't pull out your intestines like a rope. So it just doesn't work that way because all the small intestines, they're all held together by this membrane. And this membrane is called the mesentery. So I'm actually creating with my red pen here, I'm creating mesentery. The mesentery is the membrane that attaches all of this small intestine together. All right, so I'm just creating some mesentery in my picture here. So this is all mesentery. Let's go ahead and label that. Mesentery. So that's the mesentery. The mesentery is this membrane. It's full of blood vessels too. Lots of blood vessels that feed the small intestine are in the mesentery. But it's all of this membrane that holds the small intestine together. Now, the final thing is this structure called the omentum. And the omentum is a covering. You basically have this kind of covering that sits over your small intestines. And it's this really kind of grody looking, uh, fatty material. And it just kind of sits just like that. It sits on top of the small intestine. Of course, it's not that uh, geometrical, but you get the point. This is the omentum, all right? So your omentum is a covering. It's this fatty covering that's going to cover over your intestines. And it's used primarily as an immune system structure. It has lots of white blood cells that can aid in phagocytizing foreign invaders. And so it's an important structure as well. Okay, so that pretty much takes care of test number 3. All right. So remember, test number 3 is April 15th, and make sure you're studying. I will give you more information as I learn exactly how the test is. I'll send you an invite to the test, and I'll let you know some details. There will be a time limit on the test, just so you know. So make sure you're studying, and you'll do just fine. I'll see you later. Take care.